Hello and welcome to the Under Centre podcast. I'm your host, Daramar, and I am joined by Fionn Malloy on this Thursday evening, looking ahead to the Thursday night football. The Cleveland Browns hosting the Denver Broncos. Two sides coming off disappointing losses last Sunday. We're going to be speaking about the Browns in a little bit later on. But first of all, we're going to be focusing on the Broncos side of things. And we're delighted to have Benjamin Allbright from Broncos Radio on to speak with us to preview the game. Ben, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well and happy to be here. Appreciate it.
No problem at all. We are delighted to have you on to talk a little bit about Broncos football. And I'm sure if we had spoke maybe about 3 weeks ago, it would have been a little more positive than probably we're going to be speaking about maybe tonight, because the Broncos started well, 3-0. The last 3 games, of course, losing to go 3-3, culminating in that loss at the weekend to the Las Vegas Raiders of 34 points, 24. It sounds like a close game, but all in all, it really wasn't.
Well, right. Yeah. The last couple of games really haven't been as close as the score has kind of has kind of been at the end. They found ways in the fourth quarter to kind of pretty it up a little bit, but really that's just been garbage time stuff. And Vic Fangio even alluded to that in his press conference after the game this past weekend. So, I think there were a lot of people that were a lot more positive after 3-0. I was pretty cautious because it was 3 bad football teams, and there were cracks there that were already beginning to show if you were looking. But I think a lot of people with this Broncos team, because it's not been great over the last couple of years, wanted to seize on that 3-0 start. And I think that's led to a lot more bitter disappointment over the last 3 weeks when they see that a lot of what was going on in those first 3 games was a bit of a mirage.
Yeah, sure. And I guess the one positive side coming out of the game on Sunday is that coming into tonight's game on Thursday, it's a short week. So you can sort of right any wrongs very quickly.
Yeah, there's certainly that. If you want to go the short memory route, the flip side of that coin is if they lose this one pretty badly, you got 10 days to sit there and stew on it. So you better hope you come out with the win on this one. It's tough because you're up against a really good football team in the Browns. The flip side of that coin, the Browns are very injured right now. Something like 37% of their roster is currently on the injury report, which is not good. So, I think if you're Denver, you have to put everything behind you from the last 3 weeks and look at each week individually. You have to go 1-0 each week. You don't have to go 11-0 from here on. You have to go 1-0 in each game that you play, or try to go 1-0 in each game that you play. And I think if you have that attitude, you can try to get back on the right track and maybe back towards the playoff expectation you had 3 weeks ago.
And you mentioned the Browns are a little bit banged up coming into this game. You guys have had your own injuries. Most notably, Jerry Jeudy has been out since suffering that ankle injury. I read today that there is a vague suggestion that he might make it back for this Thursday night game. Have you heard much on that end? And if so, what kind of a boost does that give the Broncos?
Well, it would be a big boost. He's been doing a lot of extra work, but everything I've been told is that they put him in bubble wrap and roll him back out in the Washington game. You never know. I mean, last second desperation can lead coaches to make bad decisions, but coming off that injury, the extra 10 days toward the Washington game, I think that's just the smarter move. The question is whether or not the offensive coordinator that's coordinating now will still be the offensive coordinator at that point.
Of course, that's Pat Schumer, who's probably not the only person who has a bit of pressure now heading into this game. Another one is Coach Vic Fangio, which we'll get into a little later on. But one person I want to speak about is Teddy Bridgewater, because he had a poor game, 4 turnovers in total at the weekend, 3 interceptions and a fumble. Quite a tough game for him in general. He sort of held on to the ball way too long. And was sort of, he was quite inaccurate, but also maybe various penalty flags and, drop catches probably stalled a lot of maybe what could have been drives that may have led to points in the game. But is Teddy Bridgewater sort of on the sort of quarterback equivalent of the hot seat here? If he gets another poor display tonight, could Coach Fangio think about bringing in Drew Locke?
Maybe. I think a lot of that hinges on Pat Shermer. If Shermer is still the OC, it's going to be Teddy. That's his guy. That was always his guy. It was brought in to be his guy. They had the quote unquote competition in training camp, but the reality was the deck was stacked for Teddy from the get-go. The problem is that Teddy and Drew Locke are an interesting case study in looking at the spreadsheet versus looking at the tape. Because if you look at Teddy's numbers, the analytics people are going to go nuts because they look great. But the reality is most of his numbers come in garbage time or in net negative situations, 3rd and 12, and he gets a 7-yard completion. Well, that goes in the completion as 1 passing attempt, 1 completion, 7 yards, and that looks good. And those stack up over the course of a game. But the reality is you didn't get a first down. So that's not good. Drew Locke is a guy who has a much lower completion percentage, but an actually higher 3rd down conversion rate than Teddy Bridgewater, which most people would be kind of shocked to figure out. The problem is that Drew will play a little hero ball and throw interceptions and stuff too. So where Teddy doesn't throw interceptions, usually, except for this past game, it's an interesting case study because it's like the Alex Smith versus Jay Cutler effect, taking the hyper careful quarterback that's not going to be able to get you out of net negative situations versus the guy who never met the hero ball he didn't want to throw. And in the end, figuring out which one of those is actually going to get you more points. And that's a discussion we've had here in Broncos country. I've been in the minority, although that number is growing, where I'm just telling you that Teddy Bridgewater will help you beat bad football teams, but in the end, it's really just a prettier way to lose. You'll have a higher completion percentage, but you're not going to score as many points because he can't throw in the red zone. He can't get you out of long 3rd down situations. And in the end, we're kind of seeing that borne out. A lot of people don't realize that game last week was the first time in Teddy Bridgewater's career that he's thrown 3 touchdowns. He's had 2 games of 4 touchdowns, 1 game of 3 touchdowns, and that's it. In 60-something starts, he just doesn't throw touchdowns. So that's the other part of this. Yeah, his completion percentage is a lot better than Drew Locke's, but his points per game, not necessarily.
And then is one aspect that you could look at to take the pressure off both quarterbacks, the running game. The Broncos have split most of their runs between Gordon and Williams in the backfield, and they're kind of hovering around middle of the league in terms of rush yards, but only 3 rushing touchdowns so far this season. Is that maybe somewhere you can look to try and give a bit of a boost to the offense and maybe expect a little more from that unit?
Well, you should, and you should go with Melvin Gordon a lot more. Melvin Gordon has been a lot more effective. 40% of Javonte Williams' yards have come on 3 carries. The other 62 carries have largely been, kind of middling. Javonte Williams has one of the worst stuff rates in the NFL. He gets stuffed for 0 or negative yardage 1 out of every 4 carries. But all people see are those sexy highlight runs, those 3 highlight runs, and they're like, oh, this guy's great. And he might very well be great someday, but right now he's not consistent enough. So the Broncos misuse their running backs. They should be using Melvin Gordon in, chain neutral and chain negative situations. And when they get ahead of the chains, like a 2nd and 2, that's when you bring Javonte in, because it doesn't matter if he gets stuffed, you'll have the opportunity on 3rd down. So they're being misused right now. Part of the offense is just the misuse of Pat Shurmur, who basically his entire game plan is take a deep shot on first down, run for 2 yards on second down, and then kind of say, I don't know here, we'll do some kind of pass on third down where you have a quarterback that, if he needs 3 yards, he'll get you 5. But if you need 10 yards, he'll get you 5. And so that kind of creates an overall problem for this offense. And so I don't think Pat Shurmur is going to be the offensive coordinator by the end of the year. This could be his last game, although I suspect closer to the bye, he would be fired. And then Vic Fangio is probably gone at the end of the year, barring a miraculous turnaround. So they need to figure it out, and they need to figure it out quick.
And if that is the case with Pat Shurmur leaving after the game tonight, if not, then the bye, is there any sort of names in the pipeline that they've looked at to sort of take over that role?
Well, Mike Shula has been an offensive coordinator before. He's the quarterback's coach. He was the offensive coordinator for the Carolina Panthers when they played the Broncos in the Super Bowl, actually. So he's called plays before, and I think he'd be familiar enough that he would be the guy that would take over. If Vic gets fired in season, which we don't expect, obviously Mike Munchak is the offensive line coach. He's been a head coach before. So there are bodies, there are options here for that kind of thing. They also have wide receivers coach Zach Azzani is kind of one of those up and coming coaches around the league, and they may want to maybe take a look at him. I don't know. So, but I think those are the 3 names that you would look at.
Right. Okay. Well, before we get into predictions and sort of keys to matchups, I just want to ask very quickly about the defensive side of the ball, because it was a side that was touted up at the start of the season that was going to be you could say a mean defense that not many teams are going to score on, and where it was maybe like that for the first 3 weeks, that these last couple of weeks teams have been able to score almost at ease on this Broncos defense. Two positions, in particular, I want to ask you about. First of all, is the interior linebacking group, because Alexander Johnson went down with a pec injury on Sunday. He's out for the year. Early on this season, Josie Jewell also went down. He's out for the year. What are they going to do with the interior linebacking group?
Well, you're going to see Micah Kaiser and Justin Sternad. Sternad had an injury last year after a promising camp, so we didn't get to see much of him last year. Seen a little bit of him this year. He's okay, but he has some mental lapses, plays like a young player, and loses his gap at times. I think Kaiser is the better player of the two. Maybe not quite the athlete, and not quite the physical presence rather that Sternad is, but I think he's the better football player of the two. Certainly has a higher football IQ at this point. Neither one of them are Alexander Johnson, who was clearly the best linebacker on this team. Josie Jewell, one of the surest tacklers you've ever seen, limited athletic profile, but sure tackler, great run fit guy. So you might even see Caden Stearns, the rookie safety, put into some of those linebacking spots as well. Maybe even Kareem Jackson brought down. I think in the mix and in the rotation a little bit more, simply because he's just got such a nose for the football.
And how have you felt that Patrick Surtain has got on this year so far?
He's been great. There was a lot of talk in media about Justin Fields and all this nonsense, and they were never going to draft Justin Fields. In fact, he wasn't even the highest remaining rated quarterback on their board. It's interesting to me because I've watched the Bears try to hide Fields with the run game so far. He hasn't particularly been that good, but everybody ran and raved over him, so we'll see. But Surtain's been pretty good. In fact, I think he's the number 1 rated corner on the Broncos right now. He's been everything they wanted. He's a blue chip prospect, and he's been quite good. I think he's given up 2 plays where you were kind of like, shouldn't have done that. But mostly, and guys are going to, it's corners in the NFL. You're going to give up plays, but mostly it's been very good. And he looks to be absolutely a stud for years to come. Drafting a corner over a quarterback, some people say that's not impactful towards wins. And maybe it's not, but in terms of upgrading the core foundation of this team, I think it was the right pick.
Yeah. And you mentioned there that Fields wasn't on their board. I'm guessing the other person he's saying that was the more highly rated one was Mac Jones, that they thought of more highly when it came to their pick in this last draft. But if this year with Teddy doesn't work out and they are not going to continue with Drew Locke, we saw the rumors on draft night of Aaron Rodgers to the Broncos. Is that something that they could visit in the offseason if the Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Locke doesn't work out like I mentioned?
Yes, and in fact, I would expect them to do that. They felt like they had they felt like they were going to be able to get Aaron Rodgers. There was some misreporting on draft night. There were people talking about deal was close and all this. The teams hadn't even talked, but Aaron Rodgers wanted to be in Denver. The Packers just wouldn't pick up the phone, and that's what really happened. I would suggest that they would pursue Aaron Rodgers. There's another quarterback out there that wants out of his team that they would pursue, and in Russell Wilson. And I think they would look at both of those two. I think they would also look at the draft and try to figure out. I mean, you have to kind of weigh the cost of acquiring either of those quarterbacks versus drafting somebody, because you're going to give up a lot of draft picks to get either of those two guys, and you got a lot of guys in the Broncos that are going to need contracts. Cortland Sutton's in a contract year. Tim Patrick's in a contract year. Bradley Chubb is in a fifth-year option pickup year. And then Alexander Johnson's in a contract here, Josie Jewell, both those guys hurt, who we already mentioned. They still got to figure out the right tackle position. So there are quite a few things that this team needs to figure out from a financial standpoint if they are going to pursue one of those quarterbacks. Can you afford to give up that many draft picks? Because you're not going to be able to re-sign everybody.
Don't make me nervous about saying Russell Wilson to the Broncos there, Ben. Don't do that.
I would suggest that is probably a lot more likely than anyone is giving credit for right now.
Yeah, well, look, after the season, at the start that they've had, it's definitely something that can be revisited if they don't make the playoffs this year. But I'm sure then if it isn't Russell Wilson and they do go for Aaron Rodgers, I'm sure Broncos fans are going to love Aaron Rodgers there in Allegan Stadium next year, telling the Raiders fans that he owns them.
Yeah, I need that in my life. I need quarterbacks with more attitude, man. I love that. I love it when quarterbacks get feisty like that.
Oh, that was brilliant to watch. It did definitely divide opinion for sure, with some people didn't like it and some people that did. I'm on the side that, yeah, you need that bit of needle in the game for especially those sort of games. Very quickly, sorry, I wanted to ask you two questions about the defense. We just got a little sidetracked there before we let you go. Von Miller appears to have maybe had a little dip in form now the last couple of games. He started off well with a couple of sacks, but he's had no sacks in his last two games and only one QB hit. What do you think has been sort of contributing to his little dip in form?
Teams know that the Broncos can't get pressure from the other side. With Bradley Chubb out and Malik Reed over there. And Reed is, I like Malik Reed personally. Like, he's one of the nicest guys, always gives great interviews, all that kind of stuff. But he's really more of a rotational pass rusher. He's not a big enough guy to set the edge in the run game, and it's kind of been a liability. So what teams are doing is they're just sliding protection of onside. You put a guy, you slide protection on Draymond, and you double up and chip Vaughn, and they just can't get home. And so that's sort of been the problem. First couple of games, teams didn't really do that. They started doing it in the Ravens game. And you sort of saw that when Alexander Johnson picked up 2 sacks and Caden Stearns picked up 2 sacks. Both of those were from the defense kept sliding to Von's side. So Vic just shot those guys through the gaps to get sacks. And, it could sort of worked a little bit. Well, now Alexander Johnson's out. It's trying to find somebody opposite on that other side to keep offensive lines and offensive line play honest has been a problem. And that's the reason the productivity has gone down over the last 3 games.
Okay, and now let's just look ahead to tonight's game, a little more overview. What do you think are going to be the key matchups for the Broncos to win this game later?
Offensive line versus defensive line. The Broncos have to be able to protect Teddy Bridgewater. Teddy holds the ball the 3rd longest of any quarterback in the NFL. He's not a quick decision maker. He doesn't get it out quick, tries to ride through the progression, doesn't throw the football away. Broncos can't afford to take sacks. Meanwhile, the Browns have one of the best pressure units in the NFL. And, you've got to keep your quarterback clean. They did not do that against the Raiders. The Raiders got something like 17 quarterback hits in addition to sacks and everything else. That is going to be the key matchup. If the Broncos can't get Teddy Bridgewater time, the rest of it is a moot point.
And what about on the other side of the ball, that kind of your defensive line against their offensive line, especially if Baker Mayfield isn't playing? That's going to be surely a very important aspect to try and put pressure on whoever is under center for the Cleveland Browns.
Well, philosophically, that's almost not how the Broncos operate, and we're very familiar with Case Keenum here, so I'm plenty familiar with his play. But I would say that it needs to be how the secondary holds up. The Broncos' philosophy on defense is to send the least amount of people it takes to the quarterback to get pressure, and drop everybody else back and try to turn you over. It's kind of the opposite of the Wade Phillips effect. It's kind of the opposite of what Joe Woods runs there, who we're also very familiar with. So I think that it's not necessarily about trying to send people to get pressure so much as it is trying to get pressure with your base unit and then everybody else holding up. The problem with the Broncos over the last couple of games hasn't been, part of it has been getting pressure, but the real problem has been giving up chunk plays. They gave up 7 pass plays of 25 or more yards to the Raiders. That is insane. They're giving up chunk plays. Teams have been picking on Kyle Fuller and Kareem Jackson, who both have clearly lost a step. And so they're going to have to find a way to compensate for that. Otherwise, they're going to be in real trouble against the Browns.
Grant, and Ben, finally, before we let you go, what is your prediction for later?
Well, it's tough. It just depends on who starts at quarterback for the Browns and who starts at tackle for the Browns. I think if you guys have Baker and you got your tackles, I think you guys run away in a landslide. I think if those tackles are out and you got Case Keenum in there, I think it's a close game and the Broncos could win it. It really depends on if the Broncos are able to run the football and set Teddy up. If they are, I think the Broncos could win a 24-17, 24-21 kind of game. I think if Baker's in there, the tackles are back and they're playing well, then you're probably talking a Browns 31, Broncos 21 type game.
All right, excellent. Well, Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. We really appreciate it. I hope you enjoy the game later. Hopefully it is a win for the Broncos. Hopefully, and a bit of positivity, because we're a glass half full here, so we'd like to keep it positive. Short week, forget about last week, and we go ahead for a Broncos win.
Well, that's it would be nice. Broncos fans desperately need one. I think they're about to jump off the cliff. So,
our advice is stay on the cliff. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. It's only
especially if it's a mile high. You don't want to be falling off that cliff.
Oh yeah, that's definitely not.
Listen, thanks so much again, Ben, and we hope to speak to you again in the future. One last thing before we let you go, where can people find the Broncos Radio?
Well, it's 8:50 a.m. 94.1 FM is for KOA for the show Broncos Country Tonight, and you can listen to us there. And then I would recommend unfollow me on Twitter at Allbright NFL. It's a dumpster fire. Nobody should be following me anyway. It's terrible. It's a terrible account. I would unfollow me if I could. So.
You can't convince enough people to unfollow you. I think you still until you have less followers than us, then it's not working. I don't think.
Yeah, it appears not to be working so far.
Listen, thanks again. Enjoy the game, and we will hopefully speak to you again in the future.
Absolutely, guys. Anytime.
Excellent stuff. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we are going to be speaking about the Cleveland Browns side of tonight's game. And welcome back to the Under Center podcast with myself, Dara Marr. Unfortunately, Fionn has had to fly off for the second half of this show, so I am flying solo. But Not entirely, because I am delighted to have two guests with me for this second part of the show to talk about the Browns side of this Thursday night football preview show. Of course, later on tonight, it is the Denver Broncos traveling to Cleveland to take on the Browns. From the Yard Dogs podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by Jason Hand and Mikey P. Lads, it's so great to speak to you. How are you?
It's great to be here. We're doing great.
Yeah, man, it's great to be here. Thanks for having us on.
No problem at all. No problem at all. I'm delighted to have you on and excited to be talking a little bit about Browns football coming up here now. But before we do, make sure you are following us on all our social pages, Twitter @UnderCenterPod, Instagram @UnderCenterPod, and make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel, Under Center Podcast. You find us there, subscribe. You'll get all our shows there, including our YouTube exclusive betting show, which will get you the best bets for week 7 of the season, which will be out on Friday. So make sure you stay tuned for that as well. And make sure if you are gambling, you're gambling responsibly. But let's talk about the game later on tonight, guys. Browns had a tough loss last weekend, 37-14 against the Arizona Cardinals. You know, the injuries are starting to mount up. We just heard the news on Wednesday that Baker Mayfield's actually going to be missing from this game as well. To add to, Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb, Odell Beckham's a questionable. We don't know if he's going to make it or not. Owusu Koromoa is on IR now. The injuries are really starting to stack up for the team.
Yeah, they are starting to stack up. And when you start the season, that's something that you hope doesn't happen. But it has happened to us, and it's almost hard to keep track of, really, to be honest with you. We're going into this game without our 2 starting running backs. Baker Mayfield, for the first time in his career, is not going to be in the starting lineup, and that leaves backup Case Keenum. So we're depleted, but we're still confident. I do feel good about Thursday night football.
Yeah, I would say it's a rough go right now. You have a lot of injuries. But this is why, you play those guys, some of those important roles, and kind of going back to the preseason, the starters really didn't play a whole lot in the preseason. And a lot of these backup players, got some time on the field. So hopefully that pays results now with these guys having to step up, like Dearness Johnson and Demetric Felton now having to step in for Chubb and Hunt when they're out. And, Case Keenum led his team to an NFC Championship game in 2017, so he can definitely come in there and win you a few games if he needs to. So you're just going to have to trust and believe in the coach Stefanski that he'll have the guys ready for tomorrow night.
Yeah, and do you think that we'll see a little bit of change in the offensive playbook now for this game? Because obviously it is a heavy running attack that Coach Stefanski likes to operate with. Of course, when you have players like Chubb and Hunt there, that's what you're going to do. You're going to give them the ball and let them do what they do best. Now with Case Keenum and you have, like you said, Johnson, Daenerys Johnson's probably going to be getting most of the carries, it looks like, tonight. Do you sort of maybe give Keenum maybe the ball a little more, maybe to throw it out, and we might see a little more involvement with the likes of the tight ends, Hooper and Bryant?
Yeah, I think you're probably going to see us go more 12 sets with, having 3 tight ends. You got Hooper, Bryant, and Njoku out there. They're probably the strength of the team right now, with potentially Landry. We don't know if he's going to play yet. Beckham's questionable. You have Keenum coming there making a start, and then you have backups at running backs. I mean, you kind of want to go with what strengths that you have going into tomorrow. And I could see us utilizing more tight end sets, running a lot of play action. And then, hopefully staying balanced. I'd like to see balance, 25 runs, 25 passes, something like that.
Yeah, I'm with you, Mikey P. More of a, controlled attack. I don't think that Case Keenum is going to throw it 40 to 50 times. I think it will be a balanced attack. Dearness Johnson, although he hasn't played a lot, the times that he did play last year, he thrived. So, you never want to see your starting running backs, especially Nick Chubb or Kareem Hunt, be out of the lineup. But Dearness Johnson will be a solid fill-in. And Demetric Felton, that's not a household name. A lot of people outside of Cleveland never even heard of this guy. But I'm telling you, he's dynamic. He can catch the ball in the backfield. I don't think he's going to, I think Dearness Johnson will probably get 75% of the carries, but look for Demetric Felton to get some action on Thursday night as well.
Yeah, what seems to be the latest with the tackle situation? Because Conklin and Wills have both missed the game on Sunday. They are still questionable at the moment. Is there an expectation that they might be back for this game?
I don't think so. I mean, just looking at, they haven't practiced all week, but Wills didn't practice before and he started, but I just have this feeling, they're probably going to go with Rodney Hudson again at right tackle and give Conklin another week off and give Wills also another week to heal up. And just hope and believe that, that the offensive line coach Callahan is one of the best in the business, can get those guys coached up. But a lot of times as a player, on a short week of practice, like both teams are going to kind of be very basic, but vanilla. It kind of helps players kind of get back to basics. So I'm hoping they'll be able to, kind of thrive off of that, going into Thursday night.
Yeah, and looking, especially you mentioned there, Hudson coming in at right tackle. That's going to be a very important spot coming into this game because more than likely be going up against Von Miller. And we were speaking to Benjamin Allbright earlier on in the show, and we were speaking about Von and his issues that he's had in the last couple of games with no sacks and only one QB hit. So teams are definitely scheming against him at the moment. Do you think that's going to be more of the same, Jason, tonight?
I think that they got their hands full with Von Miller. I actually saw a video with him yesterday, and he vowed to get a couple sacks. Now, this was when Baker Mayfield was going to play, so I'm sure his plan, is probably still the same with Case Keenum. We have our hands full. That's somebody that you definitely have to watch out for. He's a game wrecker. Anytime you take a sack, that's almost a drive killer, right? I mean, it basically stops you in your tracks. So we have to step up, and I don't know if Jack Conklin or Jedrick Wills are going to play. I tend to agree with Mikey. I think that the Browns are trying to get through this game, hopefully squeak out with a win, and look forward to the 10 days off so some of these players can get healthy for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and it is a tough schedule coming up the next 4 games for the Browns. Like you were saying, Broncos tonight, Steelers, then 10 days time, like you mentioned, Jason. Then back-to-back away trips, first of all to Cincinnati against the Bengals, and then against the Patriots. How important is tonight going to be to make sure that you stay above 500, especially heading into those tough games?
Oh, it's a must-win for us. You're 3-3. Your backs are against the wall. Like you said, you lose this game. Now you got 10 days to think about Pittsburgh coming to town, who's going to play with a chip on their shoulder, looking for revenge from last year's playoff. I mean, Cincinnati seems to be up and coming, and you're going to go on the road against them. They're playing with a lot of confidence. This is definitely if you see yourself trying to get healthy and still being a playoff team this year, this game is the most important game. It's a playoff game basically this Thursday night.
And what's concerning, if you look at the Broncos, what they won their first 3, they lost their last 3. The Browns have lost 2 in a row. Both teams are in a desperate situation. Both teams are really wanting to get this win tonight. So I think it's going to be who wants it more. Teddy Bridgewater, he's a great quarterback. The Browns defense, I think, is going to have to step up this game. I really do. I think if we're going to win this ball game, the Browns defense has to step up and not let the Broncos score a lot of points. I mean, Case Keenum, I think he's a great solid backup. I think he's going to do well. He knows the offense very well. He knows the system well. He sat behind Baker for the last couple of years, so there's not going to be a problem there. And also with Case Keenum, this is something that's interesting. I mean, he's used to practicing with the twos. He should have some chemistry with some of these running backs and wide receivers. So that's going to be something to look for as well. But I'm excited for this game. Both teams need it. It's going to be a matter of who wants it more.
Yeah, and that is an interesting point, I guess. With the likes of, like you were saying, the twos that he does practice with, they are more than likely going to be playing in this game too. So It's not exactly strange for Keenum to be thrown to these guys, because he's had plenty of practice, obviously, to do it the last couple of weeks. But You mentioned briefly about the defense, and I do want to speak a little bit about it. There was a lot of people expecting that this defense would dominate this year, especially with the free agent signing of Jadeveon Clowney there to complement, obviously, the stud that is Myles Garrett, in the center as well, with Malik McDowell as well coming in. And before he went on IR, Owusu Koromoa had played really, really well, sort of gone under the radar, I'd say a good bit. I think he's played just as well as the likes of, say, Micah Parsons, who's been getting all the plaudits nationally. But it's a defense that has sort of struggled to sort of put their stamp on a lot of games, especially the last 2 weeks, conceding 40 points in both games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the defense has kind of been an enigma, because you had Kansas City, which, I mean, everybody's defense looks subpar against them. And then they played okay against Houston, and then they were really dominant against Chicago and Minnesota 2 weeks in a row, held them to 6 and 7 points. Defense looked really good. They were getting pressure on the quarterback, no breakdowns in coverage. And then these last 2 weeks, there's been, a lot of breakdowns in coverage, guys reading the wrong routes, jumping. They're supposed to be covering deep, and they're taking the short intermediate stuff. So I think right now they're trying to find their confidence. And one of the guys that I was reading about, John Johnson, I mean, he was really utilized in the box a lot last year for the Rams and had a lot of success. And he kind of feeds off of playing in the box, and then he gets his confidence that way. And then you kind of slide him back out deep. I kind of like to see us go more to a man defense, let our corners play man-to-man, which most of them are very comfortable with, and then kind of let the safeties get their confidence back, get that swagger back.
The defense has been a head-scratcher this year. This past offseason, Andrew Berry, the Browns GM, spent a lot of energy bringing in players from different teams and really ramped up the defense. As you mentioned, we drafted JOK. Everybody in Cleveland loves him. He's been thriving. He worked his way into the starting lineup. He's now on IR, so that's just one more splinter in the thumb. It's just that this injury bug is just happening to us all of a sudden, and it's becoming a big problem. But the defense is a real head scratcher. I don't know why they struggle at times, and sometimes they play as a cohesive unit. Hopefully they can step up tonight, because they're going to need it against the Denver Broncos. No doubt about it.
Yeah, and the Broncos, they did have a tough game on Sunday against the Raiders. And, the Raiders sort of really, made Teddy Bridgewater look ordinary. And obviously some people might think that that's just the norm for Teddy, unfortunately. But he's come under a little bit of pressure. There are certain calls for them to start Drew Locke. At the moment, Teddy is actually questionable to play, but I think expectation is he is going to play. And it's something with him, if you can rattle him early, he may continue for the rest of the game. So it's probably a lot of the onus is going to be on Clowney, McDowell, Garrett to get to him early and to, put the fear of God, you could say, into him.
Yeah. Teddy Bridgewater, he does hold on to the ball sometimes a little too long. We were talking on our podcast last night, Mikey P and I, we're looking for Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney to really feast tonight and go after him, because Teddy Bridgewater will make mistakes. And if he holds on to that ball a little too long, we can get to him. And like I'd mentioned before, for us to win this ball game, it's really going to depend on our defense. Our offense, I do look for them to step up and play a solid game, not turn over the ball, but it's really our defense that I think is going to be the key.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah, the defense is definitely going to have to step up. You're missing JOK, who was kind of lightning in a bottle when he played. He was Pro Football Focus third highest rated defensive player for rookies so far this year. He's really playing well, and losing him hurts. And it's been surprising, because I thought the secondary was really going to be a strength this year with addition of John Johnson and Troy Hill, they're very solid. I think sometimes I don't ever like to blame coaches because, I was a player myself way back, and I never like to put onus or blame on the coaches. But sometimes coaches are guilty of trying to fit pieces into their system to make it work. And I don't think you should ever coach like that. I think you should always coach to someone's strengths and what they do well and put them in positions to succeed. And I think when you see coaches that do that, they're often more successful in this league than the coaches that are like, well, no, I run a soft zone and we rush for that. That's how our defense is going to be known. Some coaches, they just need to be able to sometimes, switch it up and kind of feature your players that are playing right now.
Yeah. Speaking of coaches and, right fits, I want to speak a little bit about Baker Mayfield. He's not playing tonight, but the comments earlier on this week, were they sort of concerning to you? And for those that didn't hear them, when he was asked earlier on the week about possibly playing in this game, he says, "It's my decision. I get to say whether I play or not. It's just how it is." I can understand, from my own point of view, I can understand if that was a Aaron Rodgers or a Russell Wilson, these guys with the big contracts saying something like that. But for Baker, who still is on his rookie deal, some might see it as, ultimate, confidence in his own abilities. Others might see it differently. How did you guys take those comments?
To me, it was definitely a sign of ultimate confidence in the abilities that he has. I think he's always been a guy that, that's his whole MO. Like, he's played with a chip on his shoulder from high school to college to the pro game. He always carries that chip around. That's when he seems to play really well. So I think he also a little bit creeps in the back of his mind that he knows, this is kind of his contract year too. So if he's not playing, you can't really, show yourself. And now you've potentially cost yourself a $30 million deal. Now you're maybe looking somewhere in the realms of, 20 to that $20 million range. So I think he's kind of a catch-22. I always want to see my quarterback say, I want the ball and I want to be able to play. But, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the doctors telling him, what's the best for him long-term. And the team's going to also have some say in that too. And personally, I think if he couldn't do any more damage to the arm, they would have him out there and he'd be out there if he could play. So that just leads me to believe that there is some potential risk that they were looking at for him, long term, which shows, they probably want to keep him around long term now too.
He's just telling the doctors, just take that arm off, docs. I don't need it to throw. I just need my right arm. It's giving me too much trouble at this stage already. But Jason, what did you make of the comments during the week?
I really didn't read too much into it. I can understand why you would read into it, because he's basically saying it's his decision to play or not. Nobody knows how Baker's shoulder feels except for him. He went to a doctor, got it looked at. Then he went for a second opinion, and that was kind of a head scratcher because obviously the first doctor told him something that he didn't want to hear. So you kind of knew at that point he's probably more hurt than he's leading on, right? And nobody's ever going to question his toughness. So I didn't read into it too much, only that Baker's a leader of our team, and I really think if he was missing his left pinky finger, he would be out there throwing the football. So that's where I'm at on that. I didn't read too much into it, but I can understand why somebody would.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to get the thoughts of, people within the fan base of Baker, because obviously he does divide opinion sort of for people who are not, say, fans of the Browns, and maybe it is the same within the Browns fan base. But like you mentioned, Mikey, there, it is his contract year this year, and he'd probably be looking for one of, if not the biggest deal he can get. Would you be comfortable giving him, that $30 million a year?
I think you always look at it and you weigh what's going on. Like, you look out there and, from the sounds of this offseason is going to be a very interesting NFL offseason. You're going to have a lot of moving pieces moving around. If I could give Aaron Rodgers $30 million for the last 3 years of his career, I'd probably go ahead and do that. If I could make a move, if Seattle and Russell Wilson finally have a divorce and they want to break up and you have the potential to do that, I'm comfortable giving him $30-40 million a year. I know what Russell Wilson can do, but you also have to look around and understand that, sometimes you have to look at what's potentially out there. You have to look at your other suitors, or you're looking into the draft. So you're talking about, are they going to go back into the draft now? This is probably one of the weakest quarterback drafts coming up. So that's probably not an option. So I think you could look at potentially, maybe it's not a long-term deal, but maybe you could do like a 1 to 2 year type of deal with him, and maybe do it like very incentive laden, to where it's like, hey, if you show out and you play out, you're gonna make a ton of money.
Jason, what you think?
It's gonna be a tough decision if Baker were to. I don't know this, but let's say he doesn't play for the rest of the year. I think he'll be back and he'll try to give it a go again. Will he last the whole season? I don't know. But let's say he doesn't. It's going to be an interesting decision, because if you're the Browns GM, Andrew Berry, what do you do? There is the 5th year option, instead of signing them to a long-term deal, you can give them a 5th year option and give it another year, which I think would be the smartest play, unless, like Mikey P said, if Russell Wilson was to become available, or an Aaron Rodgers, obviously you would take a look at that, but we're just specifically talking about Baker.
Right.
I think that would be the smartest thing to do, especially if we don't see Baker the rest of the year and you're left with this sample size of what he's done so far this year. That would be tough for me to offer him a contract for 6 years, $30 million a year based on what we saw this year.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with you. And like the point that you mentioned there, Mike, about giving him maybe a 1 or 2 year deal, it might be a little difficult just because, like you said, he is sort of that, has that ultimate confidence in his own ability that maybe if you're not going to give me the 3, 4, 5 years that I want, he might get it somewhere else. And there is always teams looking for quarterbacks that will be willing to offer silly money for players that they think is going to turn their franchise around. But before we let you go, is there any other areas of tonight's game that you feel is very important for the Browns that they'll need to go after to win this game tonight, and that we haven't mentioned?
Go ahead, Jason.
Well, I was just going to jokingly say I hope Case Keenum stays healthy, because I'm not even sure who our third string quarterback is. Jarvis Landry?
It's kind of interesting. So that you talk about who our third string quarterback was. So in the preseason, it was Kyle Lauletta, and he got released at the end of preseason. Right. They actually started games in this league, and Nick Mullins. So you don't want to see Nick Mullins in the game either.
You don't.
But this to me, the important thing this week, of course, is keep everybody healthy. But it's going to be something over the last few weeks that Stefanski's been really aggressive with going for it on 4th downs. I think if the points are there and you can take them this week with kicking the field goal, you're going to need to do that this week. Points are going to be at a premium when you're dealing with injuries and you're dealing with backups at certain positions. So take the points and take this is important to take what's given to you this week.
Yeah, for sure. And finally, predictions for tonight. What are the scores that you guys have?
My score prediction is 24-17 Browns.
We were close. We each had them winning by a touchdown. I said 26-19 was going to be the final score. But that was when I thought Baker was going to be playing. With Case, I think you could see a little bit lower scoring game. But 20. I'm going to stick with my original prediction of 20.
I was going to say, yeah, Mikey P, keep it the same, man. Let's just roll with it.
I'm going to keep it the same.
Yeah.
Stick to that. Stick to your guns, man. Of course, you got to. But yeah, and look, I think, yeah, you're right. I don't think it's going to be a lot of points. Like the over at the moment from what I'm seeing is about 41.5. And, that's probably about right. I think actually it might stay under that. I was thinking maybe a 20 to sort of 14 sort of game or something like that going that way. So I don't think it's going to be a lot of points. We've been treated to a lot of great primetime games so far this year. Every now and again, there's got to be one low scoring one in there. And I think this could be the one. It just with all the injuries as well, not just with the Browns, on the Broncos side of things as well. I don't think they have anyone left at wide receiver anymore.
No, yeah, they're banged up too there. And that's the whole proponent. Like I was never a big fan of the Thursday night games other than like when they play on Thanksgiving. And, that I think they're going to reevaluate. You're probably going to see that when that comes up in the next like contract talks and with the union and stuff. Like these Thursday night games, I think each week there's been a high priority injury every Thursday night so far to start the season. So wow. I think they're going to have to start thinking about these Thursday night games long term for the game.
Yeah, it's too much money involved in it. Now that Amazon, I think, are getting involved in the Thursday night games, it'd be very tough to sort of see. Money unfortunately rules all, and I don't think the league would be any rush to get rid of them. Unfortunately, even though like if we could have a football game on every day, it'd be great.
Well, I don't know if you guys remember, but they at one time they did it. It was like 2 seasons they did it. They actually did 2 bye weeks in a season. So back then it was an 18-week schedule because they had 16 games. So you'd be looking at something like a 19-week schedule. But it's definitely like if they want to keep the Thursday night games, they could do it to where if every team had 2 byes, they could build one of their bye weeks in, and then they come off the bye and they're playing that Thursday night. So maybe that's kind of a scenario they could look at. Maybe I need to write a letter to Roger Goodell.
Yeah, and look, that's a pretty interesting way of seeing it, because like we've mentioned it a couple of times here tonight, and it's mentioned so many other times when we preview Thursday night games, it's always looking at after. You've got that 10 days rest after, that mini bye after. Not enough attention is given to that before. Like I said, it's a 4-day turnaround. These guys are only doing pretty much walkthroughs as well, and it's really hard to sort of game plan. So it's most of the game planning is probably done the week before, where they're trying to get 2 games worth of tape in the 1 week. So it is tough. And like you were saying, Mike, if you do that, if you can organize to make sure you have your bye week before you go into that Thursday night football, I think that's a way, like you're saying, of keeping everyone happy.
I know for myself, I'll do yard work on Sunday and I won't recover till Wednesday. So I don't know how these guys do it. They play on Sunday and then 4 days later playing again. It's incredible. It's incredible.
That's it. We train on a Sunday over here, and then by the time the following Saturday comes along, I'm still in pain from previous Sunday. That's it. And I don't know how these guys find time to work out in between. It's almost impossible at this stage, Yeah. But guys, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us tonight. We really appreciate it. Before I let you go, we just let people know where they can find your podcast, where they can find your socials, if they want to continue hearing more about Browns football.
Sure. You can find our podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. The Yard Dawgs podcast is the name of it. You can find me on Twitter at Browns Huddle, and you can also find our podcast on Twitter at Yard Dawgs Pod. I got to get used to saying that because we just changed our name and everything and redid our logo. So we're very excited about it. Mikey P and I joined forces together at the beginning of this year, and yeah. So
you can find me on Twitter also at Mikey P422. If you ever want to come on there and talk some football, I don't just talk Browns, so talk about any team. I am a huge football buff and fan. So.
Excellent stuff. Oh, don't worry, Mikey. We're going to be having plenty of conversations about how you think you can get Russell Wilson away from my Seahawks, but he's not going anywhere. There's no divorce happening, right? He's staying where he is. I had to deal with in the first part of the show with the rumors of him going to Denver, and now he's going to be going to the Browns as well.
Well, I just keep sending travel brochures to his wife for and like the school systems for Cleveland. So I'm just trying to get through him from his wife. So
I know you could probably I don't know, maybe maybe LeBron or something can give her a phone call, just saying, look, I went back. I left and I went back. That's how good Cleveland is. You got to come over. But listen, guys, it's been great having you on. I hope you enjoyed the game earlier on, and fingers crossed for you guys for a Browns victory.
Thank you so much for having us on.
Man. All right, thanks for having us on. Have a good night.
No problem. And that is where we're going to wrap up this edition of the Thursday Night Football Preview Show. If you are in Ireland, you're staying up to watch the game tonight, I hope you enjoy it. And make sure that you are following the guys on Twitter and listening to their show for a post Thursday Night Football show. I'm assuming, guys, that will be out in the next couple of days.
We actually record on Tuesday nights, but next week we're going to record on Wednesday night with Garrett Bush. So that'll be our next guest on the show.
Excellent stuff. There you go. That's the show to look out for a breakdown of the game when, like you said, with Garrett Bush. So we definitely want to check out. Like I said, before we go, guys, make sure you follow us on Twitter @UnderCenterPod, Instagram @UnderCenterPod, and make sure you're following subscribed, I should say, to YouTube, Under Center Podcast. That's where you'll find our betting show on Friday morning for you to give you some tips for week 7 of the regular season. We've had a few wins so far. We hope to continue that. But until next time, enjoy the game, and we'll see you soon.